The NGV Triennial, particularly this year, is a sprawling exhibition, and it's huge. It's even around 30% bigger than the previous iteration we did in 2017. So it somehow depends how long people will have to spend in the exhibition as to how they might best navigate, whether they do decide to do a lot of research before they come and then tick that, write everything down and tick them all off as they see things, or whether just to arrive and immerse oneself and just spend as long as you have wandering around. I think the latter is quite a good approach. And I do think it's the kind of show that rewards repeat visitation. So if someone has like an hour one day and maybe half an hour a week later, it's sort of an opportunity to think about some of the things that they've seen and either revisit or discover another part of the gallery that they hadn't gone to the first time. Well, one of the amazing things about contemporary art is that voyage of discovery that you might have. And I think with something like the Triennial, we really do think about first what the audience experience is of the space if they come without any knowledge, and then we give them cues or opportunities to research further if they're interested in something. So a lot of the works that greet you as you arrive are quite spectacular in scale, and that is a way to kind of draw people into the viewing experience, and then they can kind of look for the smaller and more intimate spaces under their own steam. Jim, it's an interesting idea, this I guess, pull between perspective and perception that you have characterised being the sort of driving tenets or forces within all art. And certainly it is, because it's quite a cacophonous show, there's over 80 projects, there are all these different points of view, and sometimes we've looked at a particular issue from these multiple points of view. So whether it's something like our relationship to the water, to pollution in the seas, to the Murray-Darling Basin, we have people from different parts of the world with their own histories, their own perspectives, coming to these singular issues. And I think it is because of its scale and also the diversity of the makers and also the diversity of the approaches. Some are design, some are art. There's really so many different ways that you can really connect with the things that are in the exhibition. Yeah, so it's an interesting observation that you make between those two poles, I think. You go into the Federation's court space and you're met with this enormous 10 metre by 10 metre LED screen. And the digital work is by Refik Anadol, who is an LA-based Turkish artist. And it's arguably the first artwork in the world to use quantum computing as its source. And it is also a reverie on our humans' relationship to nature, and both its reification and at once its destruction in our hands. We've kind of designed that because he was very happy with that Federation Court space, but one aspect to that space is that it does have an enormous amount of sunlight, direct sunlight on the screen during summer, at our harshest summer days. So we've suspended a black scrim over the space to kind of cut down some of that harsh light, and it has this effect of somehow almost kind of trapping you underneath it, and this quite strange experience of having that sort of hovering above you while this flowing mesmeric nature displays on the screen in front of you. So one work that we commissioned for the exhibition, which is one of my favourites in the show, I must say, is a piece by the Polish born German-based sculptor Alicia Kłada, and it's a piece called WeltenLinie. And it's an extraordinary illusionistic array of mirrors and steel and sort of naturally occurring objects like tree trunks, but then have been recast into various materials. And it presents as an incredibly kind of simple and elemental display, but in fact there's an enormous amount of precision in the way that she's laid these out to create a series of illusions where, as you walk through the space, each object appears to transform into a mirror image of itself exactly, but with a different material. So it's almost like you can't believe your eyes. It's calling into question sort of the received knowledge of what's in front of us, if you like. So it's a really sophisticated but incredibly fun installation. One of the funnest things in the exhibition is Porky Heifer's Plastocene installation, which involves a number of sea creatures that are kind of speculative sea creatures of what would happen when they evolve these different species like octopi or fish after coming into contact with ocean plastics, so either single-use straws or Q-tips, cigarette butts also, and we have, so originally intended to be a kind of playground for children. COVID meant they were no longer interactive in this iteration, but I guess the fun and the light-hearted look at that serious issue is still very much present in that installation. We have a fantastic video work by Natasha Matilda Smith, who's a New Zealand-based artist. Natasha's ennui of modern life, being alone, being isolated, and attempting to navigate the murky waters of online dating and companionship, I guess, are played out in this terribly funny but terribly sad and a lonely kind of requiem in a way of what we should do with her digital footprint if she passes away. Possibly the most enchanting work in the Triennial is a suite of objects by Japanese-born and London-based sculptor Tomoaki Suzuki, and these are hand-carved limewood sculptures. Each is a figure, and it's a sculpture of a person he's encountered on the streets of London and been drawn to their personal style. So each has all these sartorial kind of flares, and you have a 10 of these figures, which are all about 1/6 the size of a human, but carved in this incredibly precise way with so much life to them that really, both young kids and older people are just flocking to these things. They're actually incredible, and they do feel like a little city of these socially distanced sartorial folk. I guess with any of these kinds of shows, those installations become real magnets for people who want to take selfies and engage with each other in these spaces, but via social media, which has been actually really nice during the social distancing situation we find ourselves in. So Stuart Haygarth is one of the designers in the exhibition. He's based in London, and he's worked with the NHS, the National Health Service in London, to reclaim a whole lot of optical lenses, so from both reading glasses and sunglasses, or tinted prescription glasses, and after a time, they wear out, you scratch them, whatever it is, but you can't reuse them. So he's recycled them into this suspended globe, which is like this glowing orb with a light in the centre of it, and it does have this optical trick where it looks like some kind of crystal chandelier, and instead turns out to be, made up of everyday objects, which is a really, fantastic illusion, I think, at the heart of it as well. Adrian Piper's The Humming Room is possibly one of the most confronting, but also most fun pieces in the installation, in the exhibition, because it's an installation that makes us, I guess, realise our place in the ecology of the gallery a little bit, and it draws attention to the relationship of the viewer or audience member and the security guards, who are often sort of rendered invisible, and also calling into question what it is we're looking for when we go to a gallery. So what happens is you walk up to a room with a sign out the front saying that you can only enter the room if you hum a tune to the guard who's standing there, and the guard won't let you into the room unless you hum the tune. And so it becomes this situation of partial embarrassment, partial performativity, but also what would happen if you just walked into the room without humming. So there's a whole lot of, I guess, power dynamics that are brought to the surface are made apparent through this otherwise very simple and quite funny, but also quite embarrassing project. I find it really interesting you're so drawn to our Salon and Lumiere room, which is even named, with a bit of tongue-in-cheek, as it's kind of referring to the Son et Lumiere shows, a kind of pre-cinema mass experience of culture through sound and light shows. So, but its genesis was actually, its inspiration was Peter Greenaway's Last Supper project, and so it does have a really strong link to cinema or filmmakers, as well as this sense of, which Greenaway did really well, of sort of activating artwork in very ephemeral and simple ways to ask us questions about how we create our own narratives in front of artwork and en masse together. And so it's a piece that was developed in-house. It doesn't have an external artist or designer on it. It was created by our multimedia team here. Myself and Ewan McEwen sort of hatched the idea following inspiration from Greenaway, and the script, as it were, was written by Dr Ted Gott, who's our senior curator of international art. So he's really the one of the key people here with that deep knowledge of historical art, but also a love of the importance of the French Salon as a space. And so it was his reverie as much as anything on the Salon and the stories that each of those individual artworks are trying to tell in that space. In Salon and Lumiere, there are moments where the whole room is transformed simultaneously into a state where perhaps every one of the frames in the Salon gallery is illuminated, but nothing else is illuminated, or the paintings turn into sort of static television screens. And this is done through our multimedia team being just incredible at what they do, using data mapping to install a whole array of projectors around the room, and then they're able to map where every single painting is and its size, and create an ensemble, or which wraps around the whole space. So it has been a really fantastic way for people who are visiting the gallery to see some of the expertise that we have in-house, which has also been really exciting to sort of celebrate some of that technical side of the gallery's stuff. Botanical Pavilion is by a local artist, Jeffrey Nees, working with Kengo Kuma, who is one of the key leading living Japanese architects. And its form is a series of interconnected sections that use traditional Japanese architecture approaches, which were developed actually in relationship to that country being so earthquake impacted. So a lot of the techniques that they've developed bring things into tension without using glues and screws and nails, which would otherwise split the structure when there was an earthquake. The one installation that we have is by Dambert Muniga, which is a whole selection of bark paintings and painted hollow logs. And it's particularly unusual, and people have been reacting really strongly to it because it uses a particular palette of iridescent blue, and that's a very uncommon kind of palette for Indigenous traditionally based practices. And there's a reason for the blue, which is that Dambert comes from a culture where you would normally traditionally have to find the materials yourself and mine them out of the ground, pull them out of the ground, ochres and dirt, find the logs and the barks yourselves to make works in the traditional in the tradition of her culture. But having suffered a terrible car accident, she was wheelchair bound, which meant that she had to get special permission to use paint from a tube. And after being granted this permission, all of a sudden all these colours that aren't available in ochres in the ground open up. And so she's adopted this iridescent blue as a sort of signature of her style. And a little story there, which most people don't know, is that she, as part of commissioning this room, we have a whole lot of these standing hollow logs, and she asked one of our curators, how many poles are there in Jackson Pollock's Blue Poles, which is in the NGA collection in Canberra? And he said 8, so we have 9. So we have the biggest set of blue poles in the Australian collection. Yeah, it's interesting that you have drawn together, in looking at the show and walking through, two bodies of work, I guess, by two different kinds of photographer. One who's based in the US, Bruce Gilden, and one who's based in South Korea, Kim Shi-eun, because actually those works were originally intended to be presented opposite one another in dialogue, and now they're presented at different ends of the ground floor. But they had been conceived of and curated into the show together. And one is a set of very, very large photos of people in, say, an American Midwest who have very expressive and craggy faces. They really wear their experience, their socioeconomic backgrounds on their faces as part of these portraits. And on the other side, you've got this suite of commissioned, almost like passport photos. And these are photos that are taken by this photographer, paid for by their subjects, who are usually teenagers or early 20s, and they're specifically for their social media profiles. And what you get a sense of when you see, say, 100 of them together, as we've displayed, is how much the plastic surgery and beauty industries in South Korea amongst this demographic are completely taking out any of the, where that sense of wearing your experience on your face, but also just how generic it makes the look of each of those portraits and faces. So they're completely polar opposites of trying to get to the same thing, which is really how much of ourselves and our lives is communicated through people just looking at us. So one work that does play very clearly with perception is Jeff Koons' Venus. This is a piece where Jeff Koons has taken a miniature figurine of Venus from the 18th century, made of porcelain, blown it up to be over 2 meters high, made of stainless steel, highly polished. So you get this mirror finish, and you can see both yourself and other people in the room looking at this work, but distorted in her shape. And it's one of the most technically sophisticated works he's made, and certainly one of the most technically sophisticated we've ever shown in the gallery. So one of the youngest people who is in the Triennial is a young African-American woman called Diamond Stingley, and her installation is over 700 trophies, the kind you would be receiving if you won an amateur athletics event, let's say. And it's a comment on the competitive nature both of her family, but also of the American and global environment, that people are really judged about their successes through the eyes of others, I guess. And so each of those inscriptions that would normally be "you came first" or "second" have been replaced by little aphorisms that she's written. So you sometimes might say something like, "you did the best with what you had," or "they didn't have this sport at my school." And so it becomes this combination of both prowess but also whimsy. So there's a suspended neon work called Coda by Kerith Wyn Evans, who's a Welsh artist, and he's renowned for these sculptures that he does in neon, which are almost like drawings in space. This one is incredibly complex, and as you move around the space, different parts of it reveal themselves, and the relationships between lines and squiggles shift as you shift around the room. And it is a really incredible piece in terms of thinking about movement and gesture. It refers as well to no theatre and the ways in which actors have to learn very precise gestures in order to both perform but also communicate emotion. So it's not done through verbally or through facial expression, but through gesture. And so it's a really beautiful sculptural work. It feels like it could be just a squiggle on a page, or, as it is in a space, a sort of enormous room scale with installation. So we have a gallery which, as part of the renovation of the building, is very hard to find. So we put a particularly captivating work in there to try and bring audiences through, many of whom will never have visited this space before. And it houses usually our sort of medieval and 14th century collections. And it's a work by Fallen Fruit, and it wallpapers all the walls of that space with brightly coloured wallpapers that they've made based on photographs they've taken of the Botanic Gardens, the Cranbourne Botanic Gardens, and from works in our collection, Flora and Fauna. And there is an underlying meaning to the work, and it is a rehang of those spaces, both bringing in more contemporary and works from other eras into that space. And it subtly, it's teased out in the catalogue more than in the room itself, but it looks at the idea of the subjugation of nature and colonialism, and also the subjugation of sexuality through the historical works in our collection. So it's been a really enjoyable work that we always get asked if the wallpaper is available in the gift shop, but unfortunately no, it's not. There are tea towels available in the gift shop. Tabor Roback is an American artist who uses a kind of video game language to his aesthetic, and he's created a space that uses 100 wall-based screens, and they're configured in these configurations to create little or entities, what he calls magi. And each of these entities or organisms is a cross between technology and biology. And I like to think about them as the kind of forms that will replace the human race. So the kind of forms that we've helped create but that will exist beyond us. And the work is called Megafauna. And each one of these magi relate to a different industry which is going to be transformed, we suspect, through machine learning and artificial intelligence. Autofelatio is a work by Frida Toranzo-Jaeger, and it's really as a kind of a queer woman looking at the history of both art and recent painting, but also looking at trying to colonize certain aspects of culture that are not supposed to be for her, like car culture, which is very masculine and macho. So she's created an array of paintings which play with the iconography of car culture, but through the lens of different painting styles. So it's a really terrific work. Nari Ward is a Jamaican-born, Harlem-based artist, and he created a work called The Last Words of John Brown. And John Brown was an abolitionist who was put to death fighting slavery in the US. And his last words were, "This is a beautiful country." And so the artist has written those words on the wall in what looks like sort of red liquid or blood running down the walls, but is in actual fact red shoelaces. So Nari is renowned for using materials of everyday life or the street within his practice. And this is a really great example of the way he brings together sort of conversations around equality and what he faces every day, along with the street culture that he belongs to. BTBV are a Swiss-based architecture firm, so they're trying to make a comment with their work on, I guess, Australia's obsession with the housing market, but also in particular the propensity for many of our inner city apartments to be designed really poorly, but then fitted out with Miele and other appliances that make people want to buy the places. So it's sort of looking at kind of, I guess, the failure of design in a way. So Jim Shaw is an artist who really made his name in the West Coast scene in the 1980s and 90s. He is really drawn to the, I guess, almost detritus of the image culture of the US, and drawn to things like folk art and sort of the institutionalized art form. So he made a work that's in the Triennial from a repertory theatre backdrop, so the kind of backdrop you would see in a kind of an amateur theatre production. And the backdrop depicts the Capitol building in the US, which has obviously been on a lot of people's television screens recently, seat of power of the US Senate. And hovering above this scene is an array of 1950s white goods, the kind that really powered the American economy, but also created the myth of the American dream. And he's embellished this with an enormous nuclear explosion mushroom cloud that seems to be somehow made of like marshmallow or bubble gum or something. And so you have this sense of the end of a kind of American dream, the failure of an American dream, literally being atom bombed in front of you at enormous scale, 10 meters by 5 meters. Well, there's a Milanese design duo called Karnowski who have done a piece that looks at extinction of flora and fauna, and in particular animals that are on the red list, green list and blue list, which is the list that that internationally show their level of endangerment or extinction. And to depict this in a really poetic way, they've created a wallpaper which is made up of 3 different coloured prints, and depending on the colour of the light that shines on them, you only see one at a time. So it goes through red light, green light and blue light, and shows you which animals belong to which of those lists. And then at a certain point all the lights go white and you all of a sudden see the whole coloured picture in front of you. It's quite beautiful. So in our dedicated children's gallery, we've got Masaki Kawai, who's a Japanese-born, American-based artist, and she has a whole range of sculptures in there. And the challenge was to make it really appealing for children and interactive, but still stick within the COVID guidelines of no touching. So it's an interactive installation, and you trigger various sounds and interactivity by, depending on where you stand and how tapping your foot on the ground at a particular point or moving through a particular space. It's gone down absolutely brilliantly with children, and her work's really terrific. We've had a daily performance by Scarlett, who is the alter ego of Scotty So, and Scotty is one of the artists in the exhibition who has a whole suite of porcelain handmade face masks, but also along with imagery of Scarlett modelling these things. And Scarlett wanders through very regally through the crowds of the installation every day, definitely brings a crowd with her. I mean, that's the thing we've been incredibly starved of, you know. It's been everyone's reaction coming out of lockdown and coming to see a show like the Triennial. It's just how different it is when you're in the space with art, and also just seeing shows as a collective experience, seeing exhibitions or whatever they might be, whatever cultural event with other people. It's really special, and I'd be quite happy if I didn't look at another PDF of exhibitions again, and just only saw them in the flesh, because it's completely different experience, as you say.